Hi, Craig. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Annalise. Lovely to see you again.
Good. So, today we're going to chat for a moment about something that happened in London early October. One of our very long standing members working for a very well known infrastructure covering the whole of the UK, but having many infrastructure, in particular in London, was ready to go to operate in London, had got all the approvals to do so. The team was ready. And then the day before the operation, a NOTAM popped up on the screen indicating a TDA in central London so that he was grounded. So, Craig, do you understand what happened?
Yeah, I've got a bit of a picture of what actually occurred during that time. Much of it is derived from there's some online sources, obviously, but I'm quite well connected, and I've spoken with a number of contacts that have got some knowledge of the events, and it would seem that the CA established a temporary danger area in London uh, near Islington. Um, it was a temporary danger area that was set up that was significant in size, significant enough to obviously have an impact on commercial drone users. The emerging story would seem that it was a police drone in a box operation. I don't know a great deal about the details of that, but my understanding is that the drone in the box operation wasn't in response to an emergency event. It was a planned routine activity, and that the safety work that underpinned it may not have gone through the CA in the normal channels. Now, again, I'm going to heavily caveat that statement by saying that there are no solid verifiable sources to confirm that. I've pieced together what I think is the picture based upon a number of conversations I've had with people that I know, people who are in a number of the stakeholder organizations involved. But I think what's important was that it generated a really good amount of interest, not just amongst our members, but amongst commercial drone operators across the UK, about the events that led to that, and more importantly, about the principle of the equitable use of airspace. Because I think we represent commercial drone operators in the association. All of them are working really hard, working really safely, really diligently. They are they go to great lengths to make sure that their operations are legal, and their business models are based upon their ability to go out and deliver their services to their clients who have certain expectations. And the last thing they want to have to do is to have to explain to their client that they're unable to perform a particular task because a temporary danger area has been set up over the site that they were planning to do the work. Now, it's entirely acceptable. I don't think there's anyone in the country that would say that it's unacceptable for a TDA to be set up for emergency services response to an emergency event. I think we all understand that is the case. But I think if it emerges that events like that are being established and airspace is being set up to protect emergency services activity that isn't in response to an emergency event, then I think that there needs to be a revisit of why that is happening. Because routine events, there are procedures put in place to do the safety work to enable that, to establish airspace to protect that event, and also to protect other air users. And I think it's really important for the regulator and the emergency service agencies involved in this to ensure that they're communicating correctly. Because fundamentally, what we want in the association is, and what we're moving to in the UK government's airspace modernisation strategy, is underpinned by the principle of equitable use of airspace, an integrated airspace environment where drones are going to play an important part. Now, to do that, we want the processes that deliver that to be done correctly. So I think that's essentially a summary of the issue as it stands at the moment. And the really important point I wanted to get across about the association as well, and our position on this, we absolutely don't want to get involved in any potential politics between agencies involved in this particular event. Our view is that we are here to represent the interests of our members and also the wider commercial drone community across the UK in ensuring that they've got equitable access to airspace and they're not unduly affected by other operations which may not which it wants to be equal. So that's essentially where I think we stand in terms of our position.
Yeah, and if we look at the other temporary danger areas that have been set up, I mean, as an organization, we know them relatively well because ARPAS UK is part of the entities or stakeholders that are consulted in the process. And our standard response is, of course, because they often come from, I mean, for those that come from drone operators, we approve the principle of establishing a TDA, but we systematically ask for a right for drone operators to still cross over or be in a position to conduct their operations during the period of the TDA. Now, of course, they are different, those TDAs, because they can be over several weeks or months. So you cannot, bar completely the airspace for several months. Here it was different. It was for a few days, but still, as you mentioned, the idea is that there is equitable access to airspace. And on that particular occasion, probably because it was set up at the last minute, that didn't really happen. So
No, and I think perhaps one of the other things to consider as well, I've been involved in the establishment of TDA to support Ministry of Defence trials, and in doing so, it's a really lengthy process. You have to go through an established process through CAP 1616, and which is a process that's currently undergoing reform at the moment for reissue in the new year, to try and make that process a bit more streamlined. But when I set up a TDA, it took me 6 months of planning, of engagement with the Civil Aviation Authority airspace teams to ensure that what we were presenting was a valid plan. And then it also required us to undertake a really comprehensive consultation process with all of the aviation stakeholders, not just in the local area, but across the wider region as well. We had to go out and engage with them in some depth. We also had to establish memorandums of understanding with some of those key aviation stakeholders that might want access to the TDA during the period it was set up for. And the TDA was in place for 1 calendar month. And there were a number of things that we had to put in place. So there was an incredible amount of work required to set that up. It worked for us really well. It enabled us to do beyond visual line of sight test and evaluation trials, which was great. We were mindful of the impact that we were having on the wider aviation community because other aviation stakeholders were having to avoid the TDA, with the exception of the emergency services who had an arrangement to come through the TDA if required, but we had protocols in place to do that, and that actually occurred on a couple of occasions. So I was always mindful, particularly as I was the control agency for that TDA, I was always mindful that having the TDA in place at that time precluded operations by other commercial drone users, by other aviation users in general. And so we were always mindful to close the TDA down at the point at which it wasn't needed during the trial. So, if flying finished mid-afternoon, we closed the TDA down straight away. I think, in all fairness, I think what we would want to do is to ensure that that is applied equally across all drone operations as they are applied in the UK, with the exception, of course, of emergency services response to emergency events. I think we can all understand why TDAs are set up in that case. But I just think, we are moving towards an integrated airspace environment where drones are going to play a great deal of a greater part in that airspace environment. And we want to make sure that our voices are heard. Essentially, I think it's really important for the drone sector to make sure that they are recognised as a key stakeholder group, and that we have a say in the way that airspace is evolved in the future and how it's eventually set up.
Yeah, so on my end, I would have two maybe a little bit contradictory thoughts. One is, segregation of airspace is not the desired end goal, but it's a necessary interim step, and so we do need it at the moment. It would be great if the process exists, but would be fast tracked. And as you mentioned, Craig, that should be happening by early 2026, a streamlined process for ACP and CAP 1616. So that's one end. I don't think we're going to end up to one day like the overnight TDA setup. So the same protocol that you described in terms of enabling a relatively equitable access of airspace for everyone should be set up ideally in a much shorter timeline, but not reduced to one day, so that I understand state aircraft emergency services, but as you mentioned, for real emergency situations, the idea that we would have pop-up TDA all over the country for because it's state aircraft is not going to work if we replicate just that particular example. But I'm sure it is just step number one, and all agencies involved will make progress, iterate on the process so that it's a better process.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with you. I come from an air traffic control background, and I'm looking forward to the work that's being done at the moment to achieve an integrated airspace environment in the future, because I think that is absolutely the way forward. I think there are a number of hurdles, both technological and operational and legal, that need to be addressed in order for us to arrive at that, and those hurdles are not going to be easy to overcome. And I'm really passionate about ensuring that the drone sector, not just our members, but the wider drone sector, are fully represented with their voice on how that evolution happens. Because ultimately, that's where we want to be. We don't want to be in a position where we're putting up segregated airspace here and there for whatever reason, and in doing so, restricting other airspace users, whether it's crewed aircraft or uncrewed aircraft. So I think, I'm really looking forward to that future environment. It's been coming a long time, I have to say, and I remember 10, 12 years ago when I first, 14 years ago when I first got into the UK drone sector, and I remember the CA at that time talking about an integrated airspace environment, and at the time it seemed quite far away, but still achievable within 10 years. And here we are 14 years down the line, and actually it's a really complex piece of work because of the many moving parts and the many aviation stakeholders that have to be sort of included. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
tough.
I mean, what does that say for the future? I know that there are some sort of dates that have been put in place where the CA, aspirational, I guess, but nevertheless dates that the CA are seeking as a target to achieve integrated BVLOS operations in UK airspace, and then they don't seem that far away. But I wonder if they are actually achievable at the moment, if we're making sufficient progress to enable that to happen in the timescales the CA want, because they were saying that 10 years ago, and here we are. We're still struggling down the road of trying to understand how we construct our airspace for the future environment, so that the drone sector can actually exploit fully what it is bringing to the table. So I guess it's just a case of waiting to see what happens.
And I would say, it's very difficult to predict the future, but we are more and more equipped, organized as an ecosystem, the industry and the regulator to reach that, to finally reach that outcome. So I am actually not a positive person by nature. I'm risk adverse and conservative, but actually on this one, I think it will happen. Hopefully sooner rather than later. So, I mean, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Let's see how it evolves, and let's all contribute to make it happen. To be honest, um, and
Yeah.
on that particular instance, I mean, we'll be watching that space because, as you mentioned, it's important that for our community, for our members, that they do have access to airspace when they have a job to perform in an equitable manner.
Yeah, I mean, I am just so for the record, I like to think I'm a really positive person. So I'm feeling quite positive about particularly the movements that are being made at the moment, especially in the regulator and the Department for Transport. The one thing I can say is that the CA is much more engaged. The policy teams, particularly, are leaning out into industry now to get the views of industry. There are a lot of consultations on regulatory change currently in the public domain for people to comment on. Please, for anyone watching this, please do comment on those consultations. It's really important to get your view. And I think the momentum is starting to pick up. And I'm really hopeful that in doing so, what will happen is we will suddenly arrive in a crescendo with the outcome that we want, which and only in a couple of years. It's taken some time to get that sort of momentum going, but I think we're getting there now. And I think there's quite a lot of stakeholders who are getting involved now. We've all got a common interest in making this happen. We've all got a slightly different agenda in that space, but we're all moving along the same line. So I'm really pleased by that. And to come back to the TDA point, I think we can't lose sight of the fact that at the moment there's still a legacy airspace establishment structure in place that we need to contend with for the time being. The association is still going to continue to fight to represent our members' interests. And if we need to have conversations with the regulator and other entities, we will do that. So yeah, we'll continue fighting the fight, I hope.
Absolutely. Brilliant.
Great stuff.
Thank you so
Well,
much for
no worries.
explaining.
Yeah, I think we've covered off pretty much most of the airspace stuff there. But yeah, I really enjoyed chatting with you about this particular
Yeah, I
subject.
mean, we should organize uh, another chat about airspace, maybe in November actually. So if you're
Awesome.
listening to us, stay tuned because there should be some news coming up by the end of the month, probably,
Okay.
and
Yeah,
some new
lovely.
publications that would require explanation, probably. So stay tuned.
Yeah, yeah. Stay tuned, everyone, and we will be back with more, no doubt.
Cheers.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Bye.